Hello and welcome back to Live in the Hive with me, Katie Bessant. And today I'm joined by the lovely Laura from Olive Wilde Interiors. Laura, hello. It's great to have you on the podcast today.
Hi, Katie. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today. It's such a fun podcast to be a part of.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, firstly, tell me and the listeners a little bit about how you got started in the industry and how you're involved in the industry.
So, I have been an Airbnb host now since 2016, 17, so quite a long time. I got into it, I actually couch surfed across California when I was in my 20s and discovered Airbnb then. And thought, what a great way to do this. When I got back home, I then set it up and I rented out a literal air mattress in my spare bedroom of my flat that I was living in to make a bit of extra money. And I was surprised that people were paying £50 a night to come and sleep on my air mattress. So I was like, this is great. And so then when I bought my house, the first thing I did was was renovate my top bedroom to make it guest friendly. Again, it helps pay part of the mortgage because I was at the time I was single and I was, bought this house by myself, and I was like, this is a great way to make some additional income. And then it's just sort of grown from there. So now I have four properties, and yeah, so I manage most of them myself, and I've got three in the UK and one in Spain.
Amazing. And so, as well as being a sort of owner and an Airbnb host, you'll also have your interior design business as well.
Yeah, so that sort of grew alongside it kind of quite organically. So when I first started hosting on Airbnb, I was doing an interior design course online at the same time, and was like, oh, I really like this. This is really good fun. So I continued on with my interior design career, and then this year I was like, I think I can make really good Airbnbs through the power of interior design, through the experience of my own Airbnbs or my own holiday lets, and how they've sort of though that how it's designed makes such a big impact on the guest experience. And so that's where my business is now going as well.
Absolutely amazing. It's so good to have that insight as an owner as well, isn't it? And also as a guest, you said that you've stayed in Airbnbs and traveled around the world, so you've got lots of experience in that side as well. So very
Yeah.
yeah, so you've been sort of in the industry so for 7, 8 years now. How have
7 or 8 years now.
the trends changed throughout your time in the industry, especially from sort of doing the original Airbnb back in California? That sounds interesting.
It's definitely changed over the years. And I think a lot of it is, I mean, obviously, the last few years we've had COVID, which is probably the biggest sort of thing that's caused so much change in the industry and change the trends. And I think where people may have been happy to sleep on an air mattress 6 or 7 years ago and pay £50 a night for it, I don't think you're going to find many people that would be as okay with that nowadays. I think people want a lot more and they're looking for experiences. I think that's what people are after. They want something that's memorable. They want an experience. They want to feel like they've gone somewhere and have that core memory so that they can then think about it over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. All about creating that experience, isn't it? So,
Mm-hmm.
as with your interior designer hat on, could you give our listeners some tips on how to elevate their properties so that they can provide that experience for their guests?
I think it's all about putting yourself in your guest shoes and thinking about what you would like as a guest staying at your property. And I know we can think about, as owners, we can think about the practical things, but taking a step back and thinking about the experience in the moment. And so I would think about things like, where do you envision your guest having their morning cup of coffee, and maybe focus on those sorts of where they're going to have those moments, those experiences. So where's the sun going to be coming in? How's the coffee machine placed? Is there a particular feature of the property? I don't know, like you've got a nice view or you've got some trees outside. So just thinking about how to create moments through the interiors and like make people focus on those nice bits. So yeah, my favorite one is coffee. So I will always think about where they have a coffee station, what view they're looking out on when they're having a coffee station, and where they can then go and sit and enjoy that coffee and have that peaceful holiday moment.
Yeah, amazing. Great tip. And also, I think a lot of owners are sort of scared to do anything interior design because it is such a high traffic. We use our properties a lot, we get a lot of guests through. And so any design thing needs to have that durability, but also
Mhm.
that aesthetic appeal and to create those experiences. Have you got any tips for how to manage the two?
I mean, I would say, I don't know if it's just because I really haven't experienced. I think if you target your property at the correct guess as well, like obviously things do break and things get damaged, but if you buy it well to begin with, and you buy it sensibly to begin with, and you've thought about how it's going to be used in the space, and you're thinking really like, is this chair built sturdily to handle having 50 different bums on it this week? Um, if you've bought it well the first time around, you're going to buy it well, and you only need to buy it once, basically. So it's very rare that I've had to change out any big items of furniture in any of my properties because they've all been bought well. And that's not to say they've been bought expensive; they've been bought like well. And so things as well, like if you're worried about stains and marks and stuff, well, just use a nice throw and cover that over the sofa so that if it does get damaged or does get a glass of wine on it, you can put that in the washing machine and get a new throw on. And that's an easy change out thing to think about. Um, but I would say don't be scared. I'd say go for it. Like not everyone wants plain white IKEA. Um, sometimes it's nice to have a bit of ad hoc as well. So if you go to a charity shop and you see a nice table set, it's okay to mix and match because again, it's part of that design element that you're creating in your property. It doesn't need to be perfect in that way.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, no, amazing. And you've done some really cool stuff with your properties, and it's not, just white and plain. It's really fun. Can you tell our listeners some of what you've done with your properties to make them stand out?
So again, it goes back to making those experiences and those moments. So, and like I said about having like mismatched plates and things. So I have those few pieces that are non-negotiable. So the mattress is a non-negotiable. It is one of the most expensive pieces, as is the sofa. Those two items are like the most high-end item. But then I just have fun with the paint and the wall color and the accessories or the lighting because those are really easy things that you can change out as the years go by and if you want to do a refresh. So for example, if you painted the whole room pink like my room here to begin with and it gets a bit, oh, I'm bored of the pink now, it's so easy in the downtime to then just get a new tin of paint and paint it green and you've changed the whole look of your property. If you've got then your key neutral pieces like your sofa and your bed, everywhere else, it's really easy to just change it up with some paint but still thinking about creating that experience. So I use wallpaper a lot as a fun way to do that. And I think about, and again, but that's dependent on the guest type as well. So a lot of my guests are using Instagram. So I think about where my guests can stand and have like an Instagram moment. And I know that they can stand in front of this wallpaper, take a really cool picture, and it's identifiably my property, which they can then tag and share about it on social media. And it creates that experience, it creates that memory for them to then want to come back again and again.
Yeah, amazing. I'll ask you about Instagram in a moment. But firstly, creating these amazing interior designs, how important have you found it for you and your business for generating bookings? How important is it to have a really attractive property?
I think in this market, as we've talked about, the trends have all changed over the years. I think our guests are much more discerning now and they are looking for something that's maybe different from their home. And so, making your, and as well, where again, with, I like to call it like the COVID effect of how everybody's put their properties online. And there's a lot of, how to say it without being disparaging, but there's a lot of bland properties that are online. And if you're scrolling through the booking platforms and all you're seeing is like a white house, a white house, a white house, which is very similar to your own white house, you're less likely to click and book it. Whereas if you see something that jumps out at you and it's pink and purple and blue or green or fits in with the aesthetic of the area that you're going to, you're probably more likely to stop for a second, even just for that second, and then maybe click on it and look a bit further. So it helps you stand out in that scrolling stage, I find. And I think that's, you're trying to catch your guests' attention when they're looking through those booking platforms, and there is so much choice. And I think having that good photography of your interiors will make all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great way to drive traffic to your listings and to your website by having something that really stands out and something that's really unique and different, and guests can have a really amazing, special experience when they stay at your property. So going back
Yeah.
to Instagram, then you use social media a lot to promote your properties. I know. How
Mhm.
does that work for you? What do you do, and how? successful have you found it?
So it's sometimes it can feel like you're just throwing stuff out into the ether and just seeing what sticks. It's definitely a game of trial and error. Um, but I guess it all comes down to, like, obviously I have done a lot of work with you over the course of the last 6 months, and just really nailing down on who it is that I'm personally trying to attract then helps drive my strategy on social media. So what works for me isn't necessarily going to work for anybody else, or everybody else even, but my particular guests really love a reel on social media. They love to see where they're going to be spending their time, not necessarily in property, but in location. So they want to see how they're going to be spending their time. They're not too worried about looking at the bedding necessarily, but they want to see that those moments, those experiences, where they're going to be sitting to have their cup of coffee, what the view looks like when they're having their cup of coffee, and the things that they can do. So those are the sorts of things that I push on social media through using reels, using trending audio, and looking at what my competitors are doing and seeing what is gaining them traction on their social media and driving that engagement and that reach, and then trying to recreate that in my own way. But it is a lot. It's a time consuming job that takes a lot of effort. And I'm 6 months into like a hard push on it. And like I said, I've had a couple of conversions off the back of that. And I think that will only continue to grow as time goes on and as that consistency with social media continues. But it all comes down to nailing who your ideal guest is, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you use social media a lot to promote your properties, which is awesome. And I think I always say to people, you never quite know what's going to push someone over the edge. So they might see you on social media, they might see you in an email or a listing site or Airbnb or Google. There's all these different touch points we can have with potential guests, and social media could be the one that tips them over the edge, or could be the way
Mm-hmm.
that they find about you and puts the idea of a holiday in their head in the first place. So I
Yeah.
think it's super important. Obviously,
It's definitely a holistic approach. You have to do all the things. You can't just do one. But and that's not to say that when you get your guests in, they say, "Oh, how did you find it? Oh, I just found you on the booking platform." That's not to say they didn't actually see you on social media. They just can't necessarily remember that because they've seen you multiple times subconsciously without realizing.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And being an owner isn't always all rosy, is it? I'm trying to make this a very real podcast because there are times when things don't go quite right, and as owners, we're normally quite alone in that. Potentially, we might not have a big team around us. Depending on how many properties you have, it might literally just be you dealing with this stuff. So, tell me about your worst guest experience.
I mean, I will say, touch wood, I can probably count my worst guest experiences on one hand. So I'm glad about that for all the years I've been doing it. And the most annoying thing is just trying to get people to understand how important that 5-star is for the algorithm and how it impacts everything else. So we can be a bit neurotic about it. But I'd say my worst guest experience. One that comes to mind is I had this young couple that came to stay. So I had a same day changeover. This young couple that came to stay, they've been there for 7 days, which is quite a long time in my properties. I normally have 3 to 4 days max. Stayed for 7 days, didn't communicate with me the entire time they were there. I asked them on the day, I was like, is possible, can you please leave at 11? Because I've actually got a wedding to go to in between doing this changeover. So I've got to do the changeover, go to the wedding, and then my next guests are arriving. Peak summer, you know how crazy it gets. And they were like, yeah, we'll leave at 11. The wedding, bearing in mind, was at 12:30. Okay. They didn't leave till 11:45. So I was in my wedding attire, dressed, ready to go into the property and clean it, hoping to do like a relatively quick turnaround or like get as much done as possible before coming back from the wedding. And they had broken the sofa and the shower, and they had left it in absolute state. There was no way I was going to be able to get it clean before the wedding, or even attempt to get it clean because everything was broken. And so I did as much as I could, but ultimately there was no sofa. So I had to refund my next guest their full stay. They came and stayed, bless them, even though the shower wasn't working. They used my house shower, and I just gave them a full refund for their stay. And that was quite a traumatic day.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that sounds stressful just hearing about it. I could just
Yeah,
imagine
quite
how you were
stressful.
feeling at that time. Did you have anyone on hand to help you with that, or were
No,
you?
that was a solo experience. That was a fun one person experience. I mean, luckily Airbnb actually were really good about it, but it didn't necessarily stop that day being as stressful as that day was. That's probably my like most stressful day of guests I've ever had. Just because there was so much going on in a one day
Yeah,
situation.
yeah. And as you said, luckily you can count the bad guest experiences on one hand. It's not something that happens all
Mhm.
the time, but when it does,
It
when it
goes.
rains, it
Yeah.
pours.
How can you break a sofa and a shower in a week? I have no idea.
Wow. Oh my gosh. So, finally, one tip for other holiday cottage owners. This can be anything, doesn't necessarily have to be marketing related, but what's one top tip that you'd like to give to other owners listening today?
Oh, I should have thought about this a little bit more. What's my top tip? Um, I think you have to. I know actually this is my top tip. The great thing about hosting people is that people come from all different walks of life and all over the world, and everybody perceives the situation in their own unique way. We're looking at this exact thing right now, and how we're both viewing it is entirely differently. And I think you have to always remember that your guest, one thing that they might think is good or bad, you might think the opposite. You just have to remember that everybody sees things differently and treat that with an open mind. Just be super super open minded to all of your guests and all of their like isms, because just because they're not the same as your isms does not mean that they're wrong. It's just a different perspective. So I think as long as you're open minded to all of your guests, and all of their isms, and have somebody to vent off to afterwards and out of sight about their isms, that's the best way. That's my top tip. Be open minded and bear in mind everyone's isms.
I love that. That's so true. Yeah, we're all very different, aren't we? And we've all got our own little ways and
Mhm.
communicating and how we stay in a property and everything we do. So I love that. That's a great tip. So finally today, Laura, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find out more about you?
So you can find out more about me from the interiors perspective. I'm at Olive and Wilde Interiors, and I help holiday let owners to make their properties amazing. You can find me there and find out more about that on Instagram or Facebook. And then you can find my holiday let properties at Olive and Wild Stays. And again, that's on Facebook and Instagram as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all your top tips. It's been great to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so much fun.